So everything is working fine, code-wise, logic-wise, but there were a few things that I'm not liking in our design here. Let's go back to our design. For instance, our title here, I don't want to have the text showing, because that's just distracting, right? So I just want to be able to have the hint, which I don't have at this point. Let's go ahead and add a hint. We should have a hint, but it's not showing here. Let's make sure that we actually, I'm going to start again. I'm going to say resource, hint, and I'm going to say title. Okay, there we go. I think it wasn't added properly. No problem. Now we have it. And for thoughts, I'm going to get rid of the text, because that's also very distracting. Let's go back to, there we go. Get rid of these text there, enter. Okay, you can see your thoughts. All right, so that's looking really good. Now we're going to go ahead and look at login. So I'm going to get rid of all of these, and let's go to login activity. So we're going to work on our login here. So we have our create button. Now we need to add our login button there. So at the bottom here, I'm going to say login, set on click listener, new on click listener as such. All right. But before we do anything, obviously, we need to get all of the Firebase instance variables. So I'm going to say private, Firebase auth as such, private again, Firebase store, Firebase Firestore as such, db is equal to Firebase store get instance. Okay, so private collection reference. It's going to equal to db dot collection, and we already have that collection, which is going to be the users collection, right? So let's say users like that. If we go back to our backend here, let's go to our database. This is what we mean. So we need to go inside and get the users. Okay, very good. So that's what we did. And back to inside here, do the same thing. So Firebase auth is equal to Firebase auth that get instance. Oops, let's go back equal. Okay, so here I'm going to call a method called login email password user, which is going to take edit text. So in this case here, let's see, make sure I already have. So I'm going to create the instance variables here, but first let me go ahead and check in our res. Let's go to our layouts here, and I want to go to login just to make sure I have everything set up and I have the IDs correct. So for our email, so I have edit text. For email is a autocomplete text view. So I'm going to use that, right? So I'm going to say private. I'm going to say private autocomplete text view. I'll say email address and private. I think the next is just an edit text password like that. All right, very good. So down here, I'm going to just go ahead and say email address that get text that to string. I'm going to go ahead and trim, and I'm going to also pass our password. So password that get text that to string that trim like that. Okay, that's what we're going to be passing there. Of course, we need to create this method. Create method. There we go. So we have our method. So in this case here, I'm just going to say email pwd for password. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that if I'm going to say text util that is empty, email, in this case not, as you saw there, and say and text util that is empty password, in this case pwd, I should say pwd. In this case, all is good. Else, we're going to go ahead and just say toast and make login activity like this. And I'm going to say, please enter user, please enter email and password, like that. Okay, there we go. All right, so what we're really interested in here is when things are good to go. All right, what are we going to do? Well, first of all, I'm going to use the Firebase auth because I want to sign in, so I have to use the Firebase authorization there, authentication should say. Dot, I'm going to say sign in with email and password, conveniently named. I'm going to pass our email and pass our password. And I'm going to attach here, add on complete listener, new on complete listener. And you know the drill. I'm going to also add on failure, new on failure to complete this cycle and finish like that. Very good. So at this point here, we have a task. We can get a result out of that, which means the user is actually logged in. Right. So I'm going to go ahead and get the user. So I'm going to say Firebase user because I can now say user is equal to our Firebase auth dot get current user. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the current user. So I'm going to say string current user ID. I can get that by invoking our user and say get UID. Okay. Now we need to assert a few things here because that could go null, but we don't want that to happen. So just go like that. Very good. Now we have our current user. So that means now we can invoke the collection reference because remember what we're trying to do at this point. We've logged in the user. We want to go ahead and get a user. In the users collection here, we have documents for each user. So we need to go through and loop through and find the correct user. That's why we have to pass user ID because each of these users has an ID. Okay, so we have the current user ID. So we have to go and loop through and find the correct user so we know this is the user we are logging in. So I'm going to go ahead and say collection reference. I'm going to say there is a method call where equal to, I'm going to say where user ID. Now remember, this file path here is just saying we want to get this field here. So make sure it's exactly the same, user ID, like that. All right. Very good. And then we're going to pass the actual user ID we are looking for. So current user ID. We're not done yet. As you know, I'm going to say dot. I'm going to add a snapshot listener because I want to get whatever it's coming. So I'm going to say new event listener like that. And voila. Put this on a new line so you can see. All right, so there we go. On event listener, we have a query snapshot here. You should be familiar with this now because that means now we have all of the users that will have that ID. In this case, it's just going to be one. Okay. But because we're querying it, that's why we get a query snapshot object, which is indeed a query document snapshots. Very good. So at this point here, what I can do, because I have it all, I can go ahead and check if our E is not equal to null. E, in this case, is going to be our exception. Because if it's null, that means all is good. But if it's not null, then we have a problem. At this point here, I'm just going to say return because we don't really need that. In fact, this just says it's unnecessary. I'm just going to remove all of that. Okay, but I'll keep it there just for you to see. In any other case, I'm going to go ahead and query everything. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say if query document snapshot is not empty. Because we want to make sure that we're not querying something that's empty. In this case here, we have an issue again. Let's go ahead and see what can we do. Great. We're going to go ahead and assert our query documents to never be null. Okay, so everything is helping us out here. Now remember, now that we have our query here, that means we can go and fetch all of the information that we need. What is it that we need? Well, first of all, because I know that we are logged in now, so what I'm doing, I'm fetching all the information about this user that is logged in because we need that, right? Such as the user ID and the username. So we are going to use again our journal API. Remember, our global variable that allows us to actually add the most important information, which will be allowed to be used or to be seen in the entire application, right? So I'm going to say dot get instance like that, but I want to put it inside of an actual object. So I'm going to say journal like that because I'm going to set things up. Very good. So at this point here, I'm going to use journal API that set username. How do we get username? Well, we get username by using our snapshot query shots dot. I can go ahead and get the item. But remember, it's always customary to loop things through to get things to work. Because I know that I only have one username, but it's all coming in some sort of an array list, if you will. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to put all of this inside of a for loop. So right here, I'm going to say for, because I'm querying through, say query document snapshot. I'm going to call this just a snapshot inside of our query documents that we're receiving. This is where we're going to do all the work. So I'm going to cut all of this and put inside there. So at this point here, I have my snapshot, the actual object. I'm going to say snapshot dot get string with field, and I'm going to pass username. Let's make sure that it is indeed called that. Yep, it's username, all lowercase. There we go. So I'm going to keep constructing our API here that set user ID. And I'm just going to go ahead and do the same. In this case, I can just use current user ID. That's totally fine because we have set that up already at the top here. That's fine. Or if I just want to be clever or use what I already have, I can just say snapshot.getString, say user ID, like that. Make sure again is exactly the same as we have here, the key. Very good. So at this point here, all we need to do, go to list activity. That's all. We could have created an intent and add all of the username, user ID, but at this point, because we know we have the journal API, which is a global class, a global singleton, we don't need to do that. So at this point, I can just go ahead and say start activity like that. New intent, all in one line. I want to go from here, which is our login activity. This. Go to our post journal activity class. That's it. So we could say finish for now because we won't need this login activity, but I'm going to keep that away from now because I'm going to show you other things before we do this. All right. So at this point here, let's save this. Make sure everything is good. We're calling it there and click. All right. We should be good. Log in. Okay. Let's go ahead and give it a run. All right, of course, it goes back to get started. Now we can log in. So let's see what people do we have in our login. Let's go to authentication here. Just want to pick one. Let's go and open Mr. Paulo here. Let's see, Paulo at me.com, password. All right, so login. Oop, we have some issues. Let's go back and see what problems do we have. All right, so looks like we are having issues. We did not create our email address. All right, this is what we always do. I always do this. All right, I forgot to actually create the email address and password to fetch those widgets. So email address is equal to find by r.id dot email account. Is that correct? Make sure here. It's just email. What do you know? All right. There we go. And I'm going to do password find r.id at password account. Now I still always have to go and check because that's from create account. So let's see. That's just password. All right. No problem. This is why we check. Very good. So this is good. So it wasn't nothing. So the error was, of course, a very stupid one, as always. But let's try again. Okay, let's get started. paulo@me.com, make sure password. Okay, log in, and voila, it logged in perfectly. In fact, it says Paulo there. It's kind of cut off. We'll change that at some point. All right, very good. So let's go ahead and see if we can actually add something again. I'm going to pick one of these images. There we go. And I'm going to put a title here that says Paulo's first thought. And the thought is going to be, hello there, this will work great. That's every developer's wish. All right, let's go ahead, save. We should be able to save everything. A few seconds later, voila, it takes us to the list, or at least where our list recycle view is going to show. All right, as always, let's go ahead and check to make sure indeed things were added. Let's go to, first of all, our database. We should see our journal. We have a new one. This second one, I should say. There we go. Hello there. This will work. From Paulo, Paulo's first thought. That's the title. There's the ID. In fact, also we have the image URL. If we go to our storage, we should see another image. Click inside, and voila. Let's see. Is that this image? I think that was the image that we added. Very good. So it is working for our login users. So before we just had to go through creating a user, but now we can go back and log in an authenticated user. So a user that is already in our database, in our authentication, and voila, it works perfectly. All right, congratulations. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and fix a few things, especially inside of our post, I believe. Let me see, journal. Post journal, we still have that little issue here. It's minor, but nevertheless, we strive to be perfect because that's what we do. So this here should be a little bit bigger. Let's make this a little bit bigger if I can. Close this down. Looks like he was cutting off. Let me just make it larger, taller at least. I'm gonna move this a little bit up. Okay, that's gonna hopefully solve our problem. But nevertheless, things are working as expected. Very good. I'll see you in the next video.